have a friend, and he told me I could tell this story. Because he actually watches the YouTube channel. And he's watched the video from the last couple of weeks where I told the story about me sitting in that place out on the University of Memphis campus. And while I was there, that I just had this moment where I saw myself transversing throughout the universe. I saw all the stars and the galaxies and the constellations and all of those things. And then in the very moment after I started seeing all of that, I felt this kind of and I was back in my body and I was back there. And so we had a conversation the other day, and he said, don't tell them that. He said, don't tell people that. He said, it makes you sound kind of crazy. And I said, what do you mean sound kind of crazy? He said, well, you know, it makes you sound, said you might have been on something or whatever. And I said, but the thing of it is, it actually happened. He said, well, I never had anything like that happen to me. And I said, well, maybe you didn't have anything to that extent or to that level happen. And it's not saying that it's necessary for you, but have you ever been at the red light and the light turned green, and while you knew that you should go, something held you back, and right as you stopped and you didn't go through the light even though it was green, the next second a car came barreling through the intersection and you realized that had you gone through, that could have been you? He said, well, I said, have you ever looked at the sunset and just watched it? Maybe you were on a beach or at the river or something, or at a lake, and you saw the sun, the glow of the sun, that amber glow just cascading across the water, and it took your breath away. You said, wow. So, yeah, have you ever just had that someone special that you kissed them and it was magic? And it just made you tingle all over. Yeah. So you ever, one time where I remember taking a bite of a cake that someone had baked, and I had a religious experience. I had a moment. And I just stopped. And he said, yeah. I said, well, if you've had those experiences, it's the same thing. It's an indicator of your divine connection. That's all it is. It's not something special or so extraordinary that only certain people can experience it. Everyone can experience it. And when you have those moments, it takes you out of the ordinary, everyday routine and reminds you that you're connected. So I said, I'm going to tell that. And I'm going to keep telling you. And I'm going to keep reminding people of that. Because what happens so often is we have been taught that everything lies outside of us, that all of the wisdom and all of the connections and everything else are outside of ourselves. I was in a training this week, and it was for faith leaders how to deal with the media and all of that. It was a fantastic training. But one of the trainers got up at a particular time and started talking about the Word of God. And then they looked at me because I always remind them, and then they kind of changed that, because the thing of it is that oftentimes we have this notion that God spoke one time to one particular people, and that's the Word of God. And we don't recognize that long before that tradition, there were many other traditions, the traditions that help the Bhagavad Gita, or the things that the Tao Te Ching and all the other great writings of inspiration, everything, that they all were, again, people's understanding of God expressing. But God didn't stop speaking back then. God continues to speak. And so as I think about that, though, people get caught up in thinking that it's outside of us. And so I thought about that, and I remember that I'm married to a woman that always tells me, always reminds me, and I have to remind her sometimes, that you always know. She'll ask me a question, and I say, I don't know. She said, no, you always know. You always know. That when it seems like There's not an answer. If you pause, you recognize you always know. There are moments when it seems as if those 178,000 no's that we've experienced in life that I've talked about before overwhelm you, but you always know. When it seems like the negative is yelling louder than the positive, you always know. When you're navigating the rivers of life and the undercurrents of negativity try to pull you down, you pop back up again because you always know. If you remember the movie The Matrix, and in that movie Neo, he was told that he was the one. And he kept hearing Morpheus tell him he was the one. He heard other people tell him he was the one. He even went to the oracle who told him he wasn't the one. But it didn't make any difference until Neo recognized and believed for himself that he was the one. And when he recognized that he was the one in that moment, in that story for which all of the things that he had to do were necessary, it was only until then. See, the thing of it is we have to recognize that ultimately the answer is not outside of us, the answer is in us. And when we're able to do that, then we're able to do the things that we need to do and navigate life. There's an expression that says, if you meet the Buddha on the road, kill him. If you meet the Buddha on the road, kill him. And I know that sounds kind of shocking. But what it really says is that if you see anything else or anyone else as your source of enlightenment, that ain't it. If you can put it in some other person, some guru, some teacher, some pastor, some apostle, some prophet, some whatever it might be, that ain't it. It might be, as Bruce Lee says, the finger pointing at the moon, this finger that points you to the moon, but don't get so caught up in the finger that you miss the moon. And it's important that we recognize that. And I stand here and I'm the first to tell you, don't look at me as being that. Look at me as the finger pointing to the moon. The finger that's telling you and reminding you that you are divinely connected, that you are infinite but particular. I'm here to remind you of that, and I'll continue to tell you that crazy story. And I'll continue to remind you of the sunset, remind you of the cake, remind you of the kiss, remind you of those moments that are there, because it's really, really important. It's vitally important. We're in the back to school season. And I know some people are excited and happy. Some people are a little, and other people, well, I'm past that stage. But it affects all of us. One way or another, whether you have children or whether you don't, back to school is important. And I think about back when I was in school, and one of my challenging subjects was math. And I don't know about the math books now, but I know back then our math books had the problems and everything up front, but in the back of the book were the answers. Now, at first when I got that, I got real excited until the teacher said, you got to show your work. You got to show your work. And so as I got into that, I realized what she meant, that you had to show your work. You just couldn't pop to the answers. And so I thought about all of that, and it makes me think about where we oftentimes talk about turning within. And when we turn within, people hear me say that, but what does it really mean? And I'll come back to the math thing in a moment. But what does it really mean? And for me, I like what Joel Goldsmith says in his book, The Contemplative Life. He talks about the fact that we often think of meditation as being this where we sit down for an extended period of time and we focus on our breath and we feel our oneness with things. But he says that really the real definition of meditation is whenever we connect with our divine self. And rather than just confining it to just one point in the day, just throughout the day, even if it's for a minute or two, to take the moment to connect with that divine flow that is within us. If we just take a breath, if we just pause before a meal and we give thanks not out of obligation, but because we recognize it reflects our abundance and our prosperity. That if we just take the time that before we really pick up the phone, that if we would just breathe for a moment and become connected and then really be there in that conversation for that person. Rather than just saying to somebody, hey, how you doing, really mean it and take a moment to hear what they're really saying about their day and about what's going on. That as we do that, it reminds us and it helps us to see that we're connected. And that ultimately is all about what turning within is. It's registering that. And so taking it back to the math example, what happens is that I would see myself oftentimes struggling with the math problems, and I would be tempted to turn to the back of the page where the answers were and just write down the answers. But what I found after a while is that even those difficult problems that felt like that they were unanswerable, I knew that somewhere there was an answer. And so I would go on and I would make my way through the assignment, and sometimes I would get frustrated, and sometimes I might have to stay up a couple of extra hours trying to figure this out, and sometimes I would find myself balling my fist up and beating on the desk or those kinds of things. But there was something that reminded me there's an answer, that this isn't unsolvable, there's an answer. And the thing of it is that the good news for me was that if I just remained vigilant and if I just was diligent about everything, I'd find the answer. If I would just take a moment, it would be there. And when we talk about turning within, it's just that way. Life may present some things that appear to be difficult, but understand there's an answer. We might have questions about how this is going to turn out and what that's going to be and not really know where to go and where to turn, but ultimately, there's an answer. We might wonder why this is happening to us and why it's happening now. And sometimes we get caught up in that. I remember asking someone recently, do you feel like you're the only person that has ever had this happen to you? And they said, well, at this moment, I do feel that way. And I said, I want you to understand, you're not alone. You're not the only one. There's an answer. And that answer is you are infinite. You are connected to the divine in special ways. And the thing of it is, you don't even have to do anything to make it happen. It already is. It already is who you are. And when you take that opportunity, that in that moment of the sunset, in that moment of the kiss, in that moment of just silent surrender and allowing yourself to be in that space, you know that you know that you know that you always know. That you always know. I don't care, you always know that you are divine, that you are connected, that you are special. So